The story of the Sheffield Blitz. This is the story of how hell came to Sheffield from the skies on the 12th and 15th of December 1940 at the hands of the Luftwaffe. The first air raid on Sheffield actually came on the 25th of September 1916 at the hands of German naval Zeppelin L-22. It dropped incendiaries and then high explosives on Pitchmoor and Attercliffe. The first bomb fell in Burngreave Cemetery and then Danville Street, where the first fatality was. In total, there were 29 deaths, including an elderly couple and a 1-year-old named Horace Wilson, along with his parents. It is believed the raid was done to target the metalworks, as well as bring down the people's morale. But also, a lot of raids on inland England, especially northern, during the First World War, were just airships either lost or involved in raids on Hull. Those who were meant to repel the attack were actually at a ball in the Grand Hotel. This was the first and only air raid on Sheffield during the First World War, with 86 homes damaged. Between June 1915 and November 1918, a number of national factories came under the control of the Ministry of Munitions. Steel from Sheffield was used to make armaments, ranging from bayonets and guns to shells, as well as defensive stuff, including helmets and armour. Companies making steel in Sheffield experienced huge growth during the First and Second World War, resulting in significant increase in the industrial labour force. By 1915, there were also over 5,000 women employed at Thomas Firth and Sons National Projectile Factory at Templeborough. Firth produced over 4 million shells and 2 million steel helmets. Hatfields as well, which was a very popular and Sheffield's largest employer after the First World War, had a workforce of over 15,000 by the time the war had ended. In 1940, Sheffield was a city of about 560,000 people and contained industries primarily centred on steel and armaments. Returning to Hadfields, their steelworks was also the only place in the UK at that time where the 18-inch armour-piercing shells could be made. Factories were located in the east end of the city primarily, beside the River Don. At the start of the Second World War, English steel corporation's Vickers Works was the only place in England capable of producing the Rolls-Royce Merlin crankshafts for the Spitfire and Lancaster engines. This was thanks to the whopping 15-ton drop hammer, which had a crew of 16 people that produced nearly 170 stampings every day. A lot of this is also thanks to the women in Sheffield who stood in at the mills when the men had to go off to war and left a lot of the vital jobs vacant. It wasn't just steel, though. Coal was very important too, and Sheffield and a lot of the surrounding areas were vital contributors of this black gold. Coal was vital to the war effort for ships and trains, but also for factories and for heating the homes. The Bevan Boys scheme was introduced in 1942 by the then Minister for Labour and National Service, Ernest Bevin. The scheme ran between 1942 and 1948 and involved recruiting men to work in coal mines during and immediately following the Second World War. That's how important coal was to England. Tiverton Park Colliery was located on the flight path of German bombers heading to Sheffield. The pit had a 3-light system that gave men advanced warning of when bombers were approaching. The Wentworth estate was requisitioned for the war to train army motorcycle riders and was also taken over as headquarters for the intelligence corps. After the war, the Labour government forced open-cast mining to take place next to Wentworth Woodhouse. It was called the Blitz as it was short for Blitzkrieg, as in lightning war. The Nazis learned from the mistakes of the Germans from the First World War, where they got bogged down with trench warfare, and instead decided to use all their force and quickly overpower a target, and just as quickly as they attacked, move on to the next, rapidly overpowering smaller enemies in clusters, moving through their enemies with ease. The term blitz for air raids was being used as early as 1939, although it was called an air blitz specifically by the media, then shortened down to just the Blitz, which is how it's got its name. It chose the Blitz as it was a way of getting the point across to the British people that they would come over and attack quickly and try and destroy Britain with ease and with speed. It also could be that it was to connotate with connotations of fear of invasion. Blitz was also being used as early as 1940 for the name for any general quick attack, even mayoral even mayoral campaigns in America, which is why it's stuck in our vocabulary as anything that is quick and destructive. On the 1st of September 1939, 20 trains took 155 groups of children out of Sheffield. The first air raid on Sheffield actually was before London's first air raid. The first actual air raid on London was on the 24th of August, which saw bombs being dropped on the financial district of London and the West End. It's actually thought that this was an accident as a result of a navigational error. The first air raid on Sheffield, however, was on the 18th of August, where a bomb dropped on Blackbrook Road. There were no casualties, and it's thought that because it was on a civilian area and was a lone attack, it may have been an accident too, perhaps because they were targeting Hull, or simply trying to drop their payload so they had less weight to take on the way back. On the 29th, however, 4 people, the first 4 to die in the Sheffield air raid of the Second World War, were killed when a bomb landed on Sheaf Street. The Blitz began on the 7th of September, Black Saturday, when German bombers attacked London, leaving 430 dead and 1,600 injured. London was then bombed for 57 consecutive nights, and often during the daytime too. London experienced regular attacks, and on 10th to 11th of May 1941 was hit by its biggest raid. They targeted London not only because it was the capital and thus would have been a nerve centre for England's war effort, but also because it would have been a devastating blow to the morale. In the 8 months of attacks, some 43,000 civilians were killed. To prepare for any of the Luftwaffe attacks, there were several measures put in place in and around Sheffield to try and repel attackers or at least deal with the consequences. While it was still argued that it was considered a phony war by a lot of people, that is, that it wasn't considered a real war by a lot of people, it was actually policy even before the war to try and prepare for any air raids. This included 58 public buildings being modified to be used as public shelters, with a further 294 shelters being provided by local businesses. Sheffield also had 70 barrage balloons, with one, for example, at Fruxmoor Recreation Ground. These were large balloons tethered to the ground using metal cables, which would have caused low-flying planes to crash into them, but also forced aircraft to fly higher and thus less likely to hit their targets. Mock furnaces were also put up. A major defence scheme was the instalment of anti-aircraft batteries, known colloquially as ACAT guns for the noise they made, which were at places including Grenoside and Brinsworth. There were 3 stages of alert for an air raid: yellow, which was preliminary; purple, which meant preparations had to be made, such as blackouts; and red, meaning raiders were imminent and immediate action must be taken. At 7 p.m. on Thursday, the 12th of December 1940, the red alerts and sirens meant the start of the Sheffield Blitz. It is believed the trams may have accidentally given away some of the routes into the city, as although there was an order for a blackout and all the other preparations, the limited amount of trams going in and out would have sparked, almost illuminating a tram route into Sheffield. A Heinkel of Camp Group 100 dropped parachute mines that burst into flames over Norton Lees and Gleadless. 10 of the tram cars were destroyed. An hour later, after the incendiaries had caused fires and illuminated the city, the heavy bombers arrived. Shops affected included the Brightside and Carbrook Co-op, Atkinson's, CNA Modes, the Mall, and TB&W Cocaine, amongst others, all suffering varying levels of damage. Cultural areas were hit, including the Mappin Art Gallery, Bramall Lane, and the City Museum. 106 out of 154 schools were at least damaged. Over 65 churches affected. The Nether Edge Hospital and Jessup Hospital for Women were affected. The gasworks at Neep's End were blown up, and an incendiary had hit the Central Picture House with 400 people still inside. They were guided to safety. Places that were not hit or less affected included Sheffield Cathedral, the Town Hall, and Sheffield City Hall. A parachute mine landed inside the water outside of the Sheffield City Hall, nullifying some of the damage, although some shrapnel can still be seen on the pillars supporting the entrance today. It is said that the attitude of people was that of a lackadaisical nature, whether it was owing to not taking it seriously enough or simply realizing they must carry on and weather the storm is to be debated. This is how one of the worst losses of life, however, of the whole night came to be. This was at the Marples Hotel. People inside were still cheering and singing until the C&A across from them suffered a direct hit at 10:50 p.m., causing glass to hit people in the hotel, instigating them to go to the cellar and receive medical attention, and to also try and be protected against any incoming damage. This action could possibly be what caused such a big loss of life. A direct hit then landed on the roof at 11:44 p.m., causing all 7 stories to collapse onto the cellar. It's believed that only around 7 people survived, and rescue operations didn't start until the next day. It's believed that the death toll could be something from 60 to 70 people. The all clear was sounded at 4:17 a.m., but the bombers were to return on Sunday the 15th. This next raid lasted from 7:10 p.m. until 10:15 p.m. on Sunday the 15th. While it was predominantly attacking the industrial area, Bolsover Road, Barnsley Road, and Colford Road were also all hit, showing that civilians were not exempt from this attack either, with the latter being the site of a parachute mine attack, which saw 8 wardens killed. The east end, the industrial end, it was the area that was mainly attacked on Sunday the 15th. Brown Bailey's steelworks were hit, along with Hadfield's East Heckler Works. They were targeted because the Blitz wanted to strategically dismantle Britain's industrial war effort, as well as hit the public morale. But this industrial East End was hit this night mainly because a fog had covered them on the night of the 12th. It is also said by some that this was a warm-up raid, as some called it, and that actually a much larger raid was to be sent later on. This, however, never emerged. In total, between 660 and 700 people were killed, with 134 buried in a mass grave in the City Road Cemetery. Over 1,500 were injured, with 82,000 houses damaged, and around 3,000 damaged beyond repair. Thus, the media at the time was a paramount source of information for loved ones to find out whether or not anyone they cared about or anywhere they cared about had been attacked. Now, while the media was restricted by laws or international security about what it could report on, and of course would genuinely only try and report British success and Nazi disadvantages in order to try and boost public morale, it is important to look to the media for interesting and light-hearted stories that would have actually shown just the community spirit that helped rebuild Sheffield following the attacks. Saved after 4 days under debris, one of the headlines read. Several persons who were buried during the Sheffield raids were rescued 4 days later, it was revealed on Tuesday. Rescuers worked unceasingly throughout that time. Arrangements are now in progress for the transfer of some homeless persons to places outside the city. Day and night there is medical and nursing attendance at the rest centres. As bombs continued to be rained down on the city and anti-aircraft shells burst above, members of the auxiliary fire service, rescue, demolition, and first aid squads worked ceaselessly. They performed wonderful feats of heroism. Incidents. Among incidents of this raid were a girl in a crumpled, dirty dance frock being carried out of a shelter by the boy who was taking her to the dance that never came off. A woman hurrying through the centre of the city carrying a case containing 4 shivering little blue budgies. A soldier with the baby in his arms wondering where to go after his home had crashed in ruins. A woman rushing back into a burning building to rescue her cat and dog. A tram conductor taking home the takings he had been unable to cash in. Alarm clocks ringing in what was once bedrooms. A little boy in a dressing gown clinging to his mother's coat as she stood in the street hugging a baby in her arms. The phone bell ringing optimistically at a taxi stand. An ARP warder being hauled out of a cellar by his legs, clutching a boy he had rescued. A shop assistant telling her colleagues that there was no need to wait for the manager to come and open the front door. PC 545 is a hero of Sheffield's Blitz. 27-year-old policeman who spent 5 hours tunnelling under smouldering wreckage of a house to rescue a 19-year-old youth trapped in the cellar is one of the heroes of Sheffield's Blitz. He saw the family safely into a shelter and then tried to go to save the youth who was trapped. He and the youth's father worked for 5 hours before the lad was free. Go to the almost collapsing segment. Almost collapsing, a few minutes after the rescue, the debris burst into flames. This policeman has been amazing, said the rescued family last night. He was almost on the point of collapsing himself, but he still carried on. He is Constable Samuel Radford, Number 545, known locally by his number as a quarter to six. Mr. and Mrs. Greenwood, their 19-year-old son, Joseph, their 13-year-old son, Harry, Mr. Greenwood's daughter-in-law, her 5-year-old daughter, and a grandson were in the cellar of a house was hit by a bomb. All but Joseph were able to escape. Joseph was in a different part of the cellar when the bomb fell and was trapped. Harry was struck by a piece of falling masonry, but was wearing his father's steel helmet, which his father believes saved his life. After pulling out an incendiary bomb, Constable Radford dashed across to the bombed house, not heeding the bombs that were falling nearby, and began his rescue efforts, which so narrowly averted tragedy. Last night he was back on duty patrolling the streets near the Greenwood home. He said to a reporter who found him there, "It was a bit hot, but I had to do what I could. I could not leave the boy there. He's safe now, so we can just forget it." Sheffield shows its scars. Royal tour of blitzed homes. So, following the war, not only did Churchill announce it on the radio his admiration for the Sheffielders' spirits, but also the King and Queen toured Sheffield as well on the 6th of January 1941. At the end of a factory visit, the King knighted Mr. Alan Grant, managing director of Messrs. Thomas Firth and John Brown Limited. This was the first time that a knighthood had been bestowed in public in a factory. They bestowed it there because, well, frankly, he was going to be knighted anyway. But on the night of the Blitz, he actually managed to keep a lot of his workers and a lot of the factory safe thanks to his actions. And to try and raise public morale, the King actually knighted him right there and then instead of inviting him to Buckingham Palace. This, of course, is a map of all the bombs that were dropped on Sheffield during those two fateful and devastating nights. Now, while we don't have time to go into each and every one, I think it is striking and very important to look at this map and just see that while there are clusters, how many bombs were dropped over such a great distance of Sheffield. It wasn't just Sheffield city centre. Places near Sheffield, which were vital to the war effort, or simply were just because they were in close geographical proximity to Sheffield, were also targeted. And they didn't just land on industrial urban targets. Some of them landed on nature. Some of them landed in parks, for example. And I think it's very important that we remember that the Sheffield Blitz was not just a target on Sheffield's industrial area. It was a target on the civilians, on the public morale, and the areas surrounding it as well. Sheffield has a legacy that has been overshadowed by some of the other blitzes that took place during the Second World War, and yet Sheffield was vital, nay paramount, to the industrial output, to the war effort of Britain during the Second World War. And without it, we wouldn't have been able to make the crankshaft, for example, for the Spitfire and Lancasters, some of the most iconic, if not the most iconic, British aircraft during the Second World War. And thus, those who lost their lives, as either children or adults, those who lost their homes, either permanently or just for damage for the time being, all actually still carried on. And really, I think it's the decent thing to do is to remember their stories and remember their struggles, and also remember how they then helped rebuild their communities afterwards and how the Steel City endured.